The hospital doors exploded open with the force of a storm, and Elena Vance's world shattered before she even looked up. She didn't need to see him to know. Her body remembered what her mind had spent 5 years trying to forget. The weight of his presence, the shift in air pressure when Victor Russo entered a room, the way silence fell like a guillotine blade. Her arms tightened around her feverish son as recognition slammed through her chest. The man she'd fled from, the husband she'd escaped, the monster she'd sworn would never find them, had just walked through those doors. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. Before we begin this story of secrets, survival, and second chances, if you're ready to dive into Elena and Victor's collision of past and present, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin where everything changes. The rain hammered against the windows of St. Catherine's Hospital with the relentless fury of a city that had forgotten mercy. Elena Vance barely noticed. Her world had contracted to the burning weight of her son in her arms, the fever radiating through his small body like he was made of embers instead of flesh and bone. "Please," she whispered to the admissions nurse, her voice raw from hours of panic. "Please, he needs a doctor. He's been like this for 2 days and nothing's bringing the fever down." The nurse, a tired woman with kind eyes, glanced at the packed waiting room and then back at Elena's face. Whatever she saw there, desperation, terror, the particular exhaustion of a mother watching her child suffer, made her expression soften. "Fill out these forms. I'll get him triaged as quickly as I can." Elena's hands shook as she took the clipboard. Noah stirred against her shoulder, his small voice cracked and pitiful. "Mama, it hurts." "I know, baby. I know." She pressed her lips to his forehead, feeling the dangerous heat beneath his skin. "The doctors are going to make you feel better. I promise." It was a promise she had no business making, but mothers made impossible promises to their children every day. It was what kept the world turning when logic suggested it should stop. She found a chair in the corner. She always chose corners now, positions with walls at her back and clear views of the exits, and began filling out the forms with practiced deception. Name: Elena Vance. Previous name: classified as her business. Emergency contact: none. Insurance: whatever low-income option she'd managed to scrape together. Father's information: left blank. Always left blank. She'd become an expert at erasure over the past 5 years, expert at disappearing, at creating a life built on careful omissions and strategic silences. The woman she'd been before, Elena Russo, wife of one of the most feared men on the East Coast, that woman was dead, had to be dead. Because if she wasn't, if anyone discovered who she'd really been, who Noah really was. Elena forced the thought away and focused on her son. His breathing was too shallow, too fast. His cheeks blazed with color while his lips had taken on a grayish tint that terrified her. She'd tried everything, over-the-counter fever reducers, cool baths, waiting it out. But this morning, when he'd started saying things that made no sense, when his eyes had gone glassy and distant, she'd known. Pride, caution, fear, none of it mattered more than Noah's life. So she'd bundled him into her 15-year-old car and driven through the storm to the one hospital in the city she'd been avoiding for half a decade. The one hospital she knew Victor owned pieces of, where his money had built entire wings, where his name carried weight. She'd had no choice. The free clinic couldn't handle this. Noah needed real help, needed it now, and she'd simply have to pray that 5 years was long enough, that the city was big enough, that luck would hold just one more time. The waiting room hummed with the particular misery of the sick and injured, a man with a towel wrapped around his bleeding hand, a woman cradling her arm at an unnatural angle, an elderly couple sitting in exhausted silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, turning everyone's skin the color of old newspaper. Elena kept her head down, her focus on Noah. She stroked his damp hair back from his forehead and murmured soft reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. The minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Each time the triage door opened, her heart leaped, but it was never their turn. She'd been there almost 40 minutes when the atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, a security guard's spine straightening, a nurse's conversation cutting off mid-sentence. The receptionist behind the glass suddenly finding urgent business with her computer screen. Elena felt it like a shift in barometric pressure before a tornado. Every instinct she'd honed over 5 years of running screamed at her to look up, to identify the threat, to prepare. But she kept her eyes locked on Noah's face, kept her breathing steady, kept her body language small and unimportant. She'd learned that prey survives by being invisible, by offering nothing interesting to predators. The main entrance doors opened. Elena didn't look, didn't need to. The sound of expensive leather shoes on linoleum, the particular cadence of footsteps that expected obstacles to move. She knew that walk, had memorized it during 2 years of marriage and 5 years of nightmares. Victor Russo had entered the building. Her hands tightened on Noah until he whimpered softly. She forced herself to loosen her grip, to keep breathing, to become stone. Maybe he was here for someone else. Maybe this was routine business. Maybe... Mr. Russo? The hospital administrator appeared from nowhere, his voice pitched with the careful deference of someone who understood power structures. We didn't expect you tonight. If there's anything... The East Wing renovations. Victor's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk, smooth, precise, and utterly authoritative. I want to see the progress personally. Elena's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. She curved her body around Noah, making herself smaller, keeping her son's face hidden against her shoulder. 5 years ago, she'd known that voice in every mood: cold fury, calculated charm, the rare moments of genuine warmth. She'd memorized its patterns the way trauma survivors memorized everything about their captors. Of course, the administrator was practically tripping over himself. If you'll follow me, in a moment. Victor's footsteps moved closer to the admissions desk. What's the wait time tonight? For emergency triage? About 45 minutes to an hour. We've had a significant volume. Unacceptable. The word fell like a judge's gavel. This is supposed to be the best facility in the city. People don't wait an hour when they're bleeding. Elena heard the administrator's nervous swallow from across the room. Yes, sir. Absolutely. We'll review our staffing procedures immediately. See that you do. The conversation continued, but Elena's mind was white noise and panic. She needed to leave, needed to take Noah and disappear before Victor's eyes swept the room, before someone said their name over the intercom, before the careful distance she'd maintained collapsed. But Noah needed medical care. That was why she'd come. That was what mothers did. They chose their children over their own safety, every single time. Mama? Noah's voice was barely a whisper. Are we going home soon? Soon, baby. The lie tasted like ash. The doctor will see you very soon. She risked a glance toward the admissions desk. Victor stood with his back partially to her, his attention on the administrator. 5 years had changed him in small ways, threads of silver in his dark hair, perhaps, new lines around his eyes, but the core remained unchanged. He was still tall, still carried himself with the coiled readiness of violence on a leash, still commanded space like he'd purchased it with blood money, which, Elena supposed, he had. She'd been 19 when they met, stupid, naive, dazzled by his attention and the intoxicating rush of being chosen by a man everyone else feared. She'd thought she could handle his world, thought love could civilize danger, thought she was special enough to be safe. She'd learned better. Learned it in bruised ribs and terrified silences, in the specific horror of loving someone who confused control with care. By the time she'd gotten pregnant, she'd already been planning her escape. And when the opportunity came, when a window of freedom opened for just 48 hours, she'd taken it. She'd driven west with nothing but cash she'd been stealing and hiding for months, had checked into a motel, had called Victor's personal line, and lied with every ounce of conviction she possessed. I lost the baby. I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me. Then she'd destroyed her phone, changed her name, and disappeared into the anonymous sprawl of a different city. For 5 years it had worked. Noah Vance? Elena's blood turned to ice. The nurse stood in the triage doorway, clipboard in hand, scanning the waiting room. Noah Vance? We're ready for you. Elena stood mechanically, every movement feeling like wading through concrete. She kept Noah's face pressed to her shoulder, kept her own head ducked, and started toward the door. She made it 3 steps before everything fell apart. Vance! Victor's voice stopped her like a hand around her throat. Not questioning, not uncertain, just her name, her fake name, spoken in a tone that demanded she turn around. Elena's feet rooted to the floor. Every option flashed through her mind in the space of a heartbeat. Run, lie, pretend she hadn't heard. But Noah was limp in her arms, fever hot and getting worse, and running meant abandoning the help he desperately needed. She turned slowly. Victor stood 15 feet away, his expression unreadable. He was dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal shirt, no tie, the sleeves rolled to his elbows in a gesture so familiar it hurt. His eyes, gray like winter storms, like unforgiving steel, locked onto her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The waiting room faded into irrelevance. 5 years collapsed into nothing. Recognition hit his features like a physical blow. His eyes widened fractionally, his jaw tightening, and something that might have been pain flickered across his expression before it hardened into something far more dangerous. Elena. Her real name this time. A confirmation, an accusation. She couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only stand there holding their son while the world burned down around her. Victor's gaze dropped to the child in her arms. Elena watched the calculations happen behind his eyes. The math of timing, the physical evidence pressed against her shoulder. Noah chose that moment to shift, turning his flushed face away from Elena's chest, revealing small features that were pure Russo genetics. The same strong nose, the same stubborn chin, the same dark hair. Victor's face drained of color. How old? His voice was barely above a whisper, each word carved from stone. How old is he? Elena's arms tightened around Noah instinctively, protectively. Victor. How old? The explosion of volume made everyone in the waiting room flinch. The administrator stumbled backward. Security guards reached for weapons they didn't draw, but Victor's eyes never left Elena's face. How old is he? 5. The words scraped out of her throat. He's 5. She watched Victor do the math, watched him count backward, watched the moment he understood that the phone call 5 years ago, the grief in her voice when she'd told him their baby was gone, the shattered devastation she'd performed so convincingly, had all been lies. You told me... He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling with restraint. You told me our child was dead. Noah Vance? The nurse called again, more uncertain now. We really need to... Nobody moves. Victor didn't look away from Elena, but the command carried absolute authority. The nurse froze. The entire waiting room became a tableau of held breath and terrified silence. Elena's throat closed. She wanted to explain, to justify, to make him understand why she'd run, why she'd lied, why keeping their son hidden had been the only way to keep him safe. But the words wouldn't come. Not with Victor looking at her like she'd killed something sacred. Not with 5 years of rage and grief and betrayal staring her down. Sir. One of the security guards approached with careful deference. Perhaps we should... Get out! Victor's voice was arctic. The guard retreated immediately. Noah whimpered, sensing the tension even through his fever. Mama? The sound of that small voice seemed to crack something in Victor's expression, his eyes fixed on the child, his son, his blood, the boy he'd spent 5 years mourning as dead. And Elena watched emotions cascade across his face too quickly to name them all. Grief, rage, longing, betrayal. Please, Elena found her voice finally, small and desperate. Please, he's sick, he needs a doctor, whatever this is, he needs help first. For a terrible moment, she thought Victor might refuse, might be so consumed by fury that he'd let their son suffer just to punish her. But then he turned sharply to the administrator. Get Dr. Harrison, now, and clear a private room. Sir, Dr. Harrison is in surgery. Victor's glare could have melted steel. Then get him out of surgery. I want the best pediatrician in this hospital attending to that child in the next 5 minutes, or I will buy this building and fire every single person in it. Are we clear? The administrator went pale and practically sprinted for the phone. Victor looked back at Elena. Come with me. Victor, I don't think, but that wasn't a request. He started walking toward the restricted access doors, and after a frozen moment, Elena followed. What choice did she have? He owned this hospital, owned half the city, could make her disappear with a phone call if he wanted. And now he knew about Noah. The hallways beyond the waiting room were quieter, cleaner. Victor moved with purpose, staff scrambling out of his path. Elena clutched Noah tighter, her mind racing through scenarios and finding no good ones. How much security did Victor travel with now? How quickly could she run? Where would she even go? They reached a private examination room. Victor opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming danger. "I'm not going to hurt you," Victor said, reading her hesitation. His voice was still cold, still controlled, but something underneath it sounded almost broken. "Whatever you think of me, Elena, I'm not going to hurt my son." The truth of that statement, the acknowledgement that Noah was his, that Victor had accepted the evidence of his own eyes, made her knees weak. She stepped into the room. Victor closed the door and leaned against it, blocking the exit. For a long moment, he just stared at Noah's flushed face. "What's his name?" Victor asked finally. "His real name, not the one you put on hospital paperwork." "Noah." Elena's voice was barely steady. "I named him Noah. Noah Vance." Victor tested the name like it was poison. "Not Noah Russo. You couldn't even give him his real surname." "I was protecting him." "From what?" The question cracked like a whip. "From his father? From the terrible crime of knowing where he came from? From your world." Elena's own fury finally broke through the fear. "From the violence and the blood and the constant danger. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to raise our son alone, always looking over my shoulder, terrified every single day that someone would figure out who he was? So instead you let me think he was dead." Victor pushed off the door, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. "Do you have any concept of what you did to me? Any idea what it's been like thinking I'd lost?" He stopped abruptly, his jaw working. Elena could see him physically restraining himself, wrestling emotions back under control through sheer force of will. A knock at the door shattered the moment. A man in his 50s entered, doctor's coat and professional calm firmly in place despite the obvious tension in the room. "Mr. Russo, I'm Dr. Harrison. I understand we have a pediatric emergency." "Yes." Victor stepped back, giving the doctor space. "His name is Noah. He's 5 years old. High fever for 2 days, not responding to over-the-counter treatments." Dr. Harrison moved to Elena with practiced efficiency. "May I?" At her nod, he gently took Noah from her arms and laid him on the examination table. Noah whimpered but didn't resist. Elena stood frozen as the doctor worked, taking vitals, checking reflexes, asking her questions about symptoms and duration. She answered mechanically, aware of Victor's presence like a thunderstorm about to break. "His temperature is 104.3, Dr. Harrison said grimly. "We need to get this down immediately. I'm ordering a full panel of blood work, but my initial assessment suggests a severe bacterial infection, possibly pneumonia. Has he been complaining of chest pain?" "He said his ribs hurt," Elena whispered. "Yesterday. I thought he just slept wrong." "I want him admitted immediately. 4 antibiotics, fluids, and we'll monitor him closely. This is serious, but caught in time, we should be able to manage it." The relief was so overwhelming, Elena's legs nearly gave out. Dr. Harrison caught her elbow, steadying her with professional kindness. "He's going to be fine," the doctor assured her. "We'll take good care of him." "Thank you." The words came out choked. "Thank you so much." Dr. Harrison turned to Victor. "I'll have a room prepared immediately. Given the circumstances, I assume you want privacy?" "The executive floor," Victor confirmed. "And doctor? No one discusses this patient with anyone. Clear the records. Post security. Complete discretion." "Of course." Dr. Harrison didn't even blink at the request. He'd clearly dealt with Victor's demands before. Within 20 minutes, Noah had been transferred to a private room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital. The medical equipment was state-of-the-art but discreetly arranged. The bed was actually comfortable. There were windows overlooking the city lights through the rain. Elena sat in a chair next to Noah's bed, holding his hand while IV fluids and antibiotics dripped into his small arm. He'd fallen into a restless sleep, his breathing gradually becoming easier as the medications began working. Victor stood at the window, his back to the room, rigid as carved granite. They hadn't spoken since the examination room, hadn't known what to say. The silence between them was full of 5 years of absence, accusation, and unbearable truth. Finally, without turning, Victor spoke. "Tell me everything." "Victor." "Everything, Elena. How you planned it, how you disappeared, where you've been, how you've lived, every single detail of the 5 years you stole from me." Elena swallowed hard. She wanted to argue that she'd stolen nothing, that she'd saved Noah from a world Victor himself had admitted was dangerous. But looking at his rigid shoulders, hearing the barely controlled devastation in his voice, she knew there was no defense he'd accept. So she told him. She told him about the months of planning before she left, the terror that had driven her, the conviction that staying would eventually get her or their child killed. She told him about the motel where she'd made the phone call, about changing her identity, about working 3 jobs in the first year just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots at night were common. She told him about Noah's birth, alone in a county hospital with no one to hold her hand, about learning to be a mother with no help, no money, no family, about every milestone, first steps, first words, first day of school, experienced in isolation because sharing them would mean being found. She told him about the constant vigilance, teaching Noah never to talk about their family, never to share personal details, never to be too memorable. About changing cities twice when she thought she'd been recognized, about the exhausting weight of living under assumed names. Victor listened without moving, his reflection in the rain-streaked window revealing nothing. When Elena finally fell silent, her throat raw, Victor turned to look at his son. Noah slept peacefully now, his color already better, his breathing steady. "He looks like me," Victor said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Does he know anything? About me? About his real name?" Elena shook her head. "I told him his father wasn't in the picture, that it was complicated, that I'd explain when he was older." More lies. But the accusation lacked heat. Victor moved closer to the bed, staring down at Noah with an expression Elena had never seen on his face before, naked longing mixed with crushing grief. 5 years. I've missed 5 years of his life." "I know." Elena's voice broke. "Victor, I know what I took from you, but I was scared. You have to understand, I was terrified every single day that someone would hurt him to get to you, that he'd become a target, that... Did I ever hurt you?" The question came out of nowhere, stopping her mid-sentence. Elena froze. "What?" "In our marriage. Did I ever lay a hand on you in anger? Ever threaten you? Ever give you reason to fear for your physical safety?" The question hung between them like a blade. "No," Elena admitted finally, reluctantly. "You never hit me." "Then why?" Victor's hands clenched at his sides. "Why did you think I'd let anyone hurt our child? Why did you think I couldn't keep you both safe?" "Because your world is violent." Elena stood, her own anger rising to meet his. "Because people die around you, Victor. Because no matter how much power you have, no matter how careful you are, your enemies exist and they will always look for weaknesses. And a child? A son? He's the perfect weapon against you. So you decided to face the world alone rather than trust me to protect you. I decided to remove us from the equation entirely, to make sure Noah never had to live in fear, never had to wonder if today was the day someone would use him to destroy you. Noble, the word dripped sarcasm. And convenient. You get to play the martyr while I get to mourn a son who wasn't actually dead. That's not fair." "Fair?" Victor's control finally shattered. His voice rose to a roar that made Elena step back instinctively. "You want to talk about fair? You lied to me. You let me think our child was dead. Do you have any concept of what that did to me?" "Victor, please." Elena glanced at Noah, but miraculously, he slept through the explosion. Victor followed her gaze and visibly wrestled himself back under control. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "I have done terrible things in my life, Elena. I won't pretend otherwise. But I have never lied to you. Even when the truth was dangerous, even when it would have been easier to deceive you, I gave you honesty. And you repaid that with the worst betrayal I can imagine. Tears burned Elena's eyes. I was trying to save our son's life. By cutting me out of it completely. Victor moved to the door. This conversation isn't over. But right now, I need to not be in this room before I say something I'll regret. Victor, he paused with his hand on the door handle. For the record, Elena, if you trusted me 5 years ago, if you told me you were afraid instead of running, I would have moved heaven and earth to keep you both safe. I would have changed my entire life if that's what it took. But you never gave me the chance. He left, the door clicking shut with terrible finality. Elena sank into her chair, trembling violently. The weight of 5 years of running, of hiding, of surviving alone crashed over her like a wave. She'd known this confrontation was inevitable if Victor ever found them. She'd played it out in her mind 1,000 times, rehearsing explanations and justifications. None of her rehearsals had prepared her for the devastation in his eyes. Mama! Elena's head snapped up. Noah was awake, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. Hey, baby, how do you feel? Better. His voice was still scratchy but stronger. Who was that man you were yelling with? Elena's throat closed. Someone Mama used to know. It's complicated. Noah studied her with the unnerving perception 5-year-olds sometimes possessed. He looked sad. Yeah, Elena whispered. Yeah, he did. Noah's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling him back under. Elena sat in the dim room, listening to the rain against the windows, and tried to figure out how her carefully constructed life had collapsed so completely in the span of a single hour. Outside in the hallway, Victor leaned against the wall with his eyes closed, his hands shaking with the effort of maintaining control. The rage was still there, burning under his ribs like swallowed coals. But underneath the rage was something worse, grief so profound it threatened to tear him apart. He'd spent 5 years mourning, 5 years believing his child was dead, that the future he'd imagined had been destroyed before it could begin. He'd channeled that grief into work, into building his empire, into becoming the kind of man who could control everything because he'd failed to protect what mattered most. And it had all been a lie. His son was alive. Had been alive all along, growing and changing and learning to walk and talk and exist in the world, and Victor had missed all of it. Had missed first words and first steps and first days of school, had missed birthdays and bedtime stories and scraped knees, had missed everything. Because Elena had decided he couldn't be trusted with the truth. A security guard approached cautiously. Mr. Russo, is there anything? Postguards at both ends of this hallway, Victor interrupted, his voice mechanical. No one enters without my explicit permission, and I want full background checks on every staff member who will have contact with that room. Clear? Yes, sir. Victor pushed off the wall and started walking, not toward the exit, but deeper into the hospital. He needed to think, needed to plan, needed to figure out what the hell happened next. Because one thing was absolutely certain. He wasn't letting Elena disappear again. She'd stolen 5 years. That ended now. His son was alive. And Victor Russo was going to be part of that boy's life, whether Elena liked it or not. The rain continued falling outside, washing the city clean of nothing at all, while inside St. Catherine's Hospital, 3 lives balanced on the edge of transformation, none of them were ready for. Noah slept peacefully, his small body fighting off infection with the help of modern medicine and resources his mother could never have afforded alone. Elena sat vigil beside him, trying to imagine a future where Victor Russo knew his son existed and hadn't already destroyed everything she'd built. And Victor stood alone in an empty hallway, staring at his reflection in a window, trying to reconcile the man he'd become with the father he'd never had the chance to be. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the city in brief, brilliant flashes. But inside the hospital, in that quiet room on the executive floor, a different kind of storm was only just beginning. And none of them had any idea how to survive it. The first gray light of dawn found Victor still awake, seated in the hospital administrator's office with a phone pressed to his ear and murder in his eyes. He'd spent the past 6 hours making calls, issuing orders, and systematically dismantling the life Elena had built on lies. I don't care what time it is, Marcus, he said into the phone, his voice deadly calm. I want every detail. Where she's been living, where she works, what name she's using on the lease, bank accounts, everything. And I want it before she wakes up. Marcus Chen, Victor's head of security and the closest thing he had to a friend, didn't waste time asking questions. Consider it done. Should I arrange transport? No, not yet. Victor rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. She's not running this time. I'm making sure of that. He ended the call and stared at the city coming to life beyond the window. Somewhere in this sprawling metropolitan chaos, Elena had built a life without him, had created routines and rituals, had made friends perhaps, had tucked their son into bed every night, and told him stories that probably cast Victor as the villain. The thought made his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Dr. Harrison entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tablet and the carefully neutral expression of someone about to deliver news to a dangerous man. Mr. Russo, I wanted to update you on Noah's condition. Victor's posture changed instantly, all attention focused with laser precision. Tell me. The antibiotics are working well. His fever broke about an hour ago, and his oxygen saturation has improved significantly. The blood work confirms bacterial pneumonia, but we caught it early enough that I'm optimistic about a full recovery. The relief was so intense it felt like a physical blow. Victor's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. How long will he need to stay? I'd recommend at least 3 more days of IV antibiotics and monitoring. Pneumonia in children can be unpredictable, and given his age, whatever he needs, Victor interrupted. Money isn't an object. I want the best care possible. Of course. Dr. Harrison paused, choosing his next words carefully. The mother hasn't left his side. She's been awake all night. Victor's expression hardened. Has she asked about leaving? No, she seems... The doctor trailed off diplomatically. Trapped, Victor supplied, his voice bitter. That's because she is. Dr. Harrison had worked with Victor long enough to know when to retreat. I'll continue monitoring Noah's progress. Is there anything else you need? Privacy, and make sure she has access to whatever food or amenities she wants. I'm not a monster. The doctor left, and Victor was alone again with his thoughts. The irony of that last statement wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years building a reputation as exactly that, a monster, a man to be feared, someone who crushed opposition without mercy. It had served him well in business, in the underworld territories he controlled, in the chess game of power that defined his existence. But what good was any of it if his own wife had been so terrified she'd faked their child's death to escape him? The question burned like acid. Victor stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He needed to see Noah again, needed the visual confirmation that his son was real, was breathing, was alive. The past 5 years of grief had carved hollow spaces in his chest, and the revelation that it had all been unnecessary felt like dying in reverse, painful, disorienting, and impossible to process. He made his way through the early morning quiet of the hospital, his security detail materializing from corners and doorways to follow at a discreet distance. The executive floor was sealed tight. Only staff with explicit clearance permitted access. Victor had learned long ago that safety required paranoia. Outside Noah's room, he paused. Through the small window in the door, he could see Elena exactly where Dr. Harrison had described, curled in the chair beside the bed, her hand wrapped around Noah's smaller one, her eyes closed, but her posture suggesting sleep hadn't found her. She looked exhausted, older than he remembered, though still beautiful in the way that had first caught his attention 7 years ago. But the softness he'd fallen for had been replaced with sharp edges, with the weathered resilience of someone who'd survived by becoming harder than their circumstances. He'd done that to her. The knowledge sat heavy in his gut. Victor pushed open the door as quietly as possible, but Elena's eyes snapped open immediately, her entire body tensing. She was on her feet before he'd taken 2 steps, positioning herself between him and Noah with the fierce instinct of a mother protecting her young. Relax, Victor said quietly. I'm just checking on him. Elena didn't relax. Her eyes tracked his every movement as he approached the bed, her muscles coiled tight with readiness to fight or flee. Victor pretended not to notice, his attention fixed on Noah. The boy slept peacefully, his color much better than the previous night. The IV line fed steadily into his small arm. His breathing was even and deep. He looked fragile in the hospital bed, impossibly small, and something in Victor's chest cracked wider. Dr. Harrison says he's improving, Victor said, not looking at Elena. Yes. Her voice was hoarse from disuse. The fever broke. Good. Silence filled the space between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Victor reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and brushed his fingers gently across Noah's hair. The contact sent electricity through him. This was his child, his blood, his son. Don't wake him, Elena whispered, the words automatic maternal concern. I won't. Victor's hand lingered a moment longer before he pulled back. Have you slept at all? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Elena's jaw set stubbornly. I don't need anything from you, Victor. Really? He turned to face her fully, his expression hard. Because last night, you needed my hospital, my doctors, my resources to save our son's life. But now you don't need anything? The color rose in her cheeks. You know what I mean. I do. You mean you've spent 5 years convincing yourself you're better off alone, that you don't need anyone, that asking for help is weakness? Victor's voice was scalpel sharp. How's that been working out for you, Elena? You living in luxury, sleeping easy at night? Or are you exhausted from working multiple jobs and looking over your shoulder constantly? How dare you? I dare, because I've spent 6 hours learning exactly how you've been living. Victor pulled his phone from his pocket and pulled up the file Marcus had sent. Shall I tell you what I found? You're waitressing at a diner in Riverside under the name Elena Vance. You live in a 1-bedroom apartment in a building that's failed 3 safety inspections. You drive a car that's 1 breakdown away from the junkyard. You have $1,700 in your bank account and medical debt from Noah's birth that you're still paying off. Elena's face went white. You had no right. I have every right. Victor's control slipped, his voice rising. That's my son, and you've been raising him in poverty while I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Money doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. You think Noah cares about pride when he's sick and you can't afford proper medical care? You think your principles keep him safe when you're living in a neighborhood where I counted 4 violent crimes in the past month alone? We were fine, Elena said through gritted teeth, but her voice wavered. You were barely surviving. Victor stepped closer, forcing her to hold her ground or back down. And you were doing it alone because you decided I was the bigger threat than actual poverty and danger. You are the danger, Victor. Your world, your choices, your enemies are my responsibility to handle. Victor's hands clenched into fists. You should have let me protect you instead of running. Like you protected your last girlfriend? The words escaped before Elena could stop them, and she watched Victor's expression turn to granite. The silence stretched like a blade. Careful, Victor said softly, dangerously. You're talking about things you don't understand. I understand she ended up dead. Elena's voice shook, but she didn't back down. I understand that loving you makes people targets. I understand that Christina's death had nothing to do with me, Victor interrupted, his voice cold as Arctic wind. She was killed by a drunk driver. Random chance. Wrong place, wrong time. But you'd already made up your mind about who I was, hadn't you? You'd decided I was poison, and nothing I could say would convince you otherwise. Elena swallowed hard. She had known, intellectually, that Christina's death had been an accident, but fear didn't listen to logic. Fear took coincidence and turned it into pattern, took possibility and turned it into certainty. I was pregnant and terrified, she said finally. I couldn't think straight. All I could see was worst-case scenarios. So you created one instead. Victor turned back to Noah, his profile harsh in the early morning light. You made sure the worst case came true by making me think my child was dead. I thought it was better than the alternative. Did you? Victor's laugh was bitter. Or did you just want an excuse to leave? Because let's be honest, Elena, our marriage wasn't perfect. I worked too much. I made decisions without consulting you. I brought you into a world you never wanted to be part of. Maybe you saw pregnancy as the perfect escape route. The accusation hit harder than Elena expected. That's not... I didn't convince me. Victor turned to face her again. Convince me this was all about protecting Noah and not about you wanting out. Elena's hands trembled. The truth was complicated, messy, impossible to explain in simple terms. Yes, she'd been afraid, genuinely bone-deep terrified of raising a child in Victor's world. But had part of her also been relieved to have a reason to run, to escape a marriage that had begun to feel like a beautiful cage? I won't apologize for leaving, she said instead of answering directly. I won't apologize for choosing my son's safety over your feelings. Even though his safety was never actually threatened by me? By your lifestyle, by the people you associate with, the business you conduct, the enemies you make, all of which I would have handled differently if I'd known I had a son to protect. Victor's frustration bled through every word. You didn't give me the chance to change, Elena. You just decided I wasn't capable of it and disappeared. People like you don't change, Elena shot back. You are who you are, Victor. The violence, the control, the constant calculation, that's not something you just switch off because you became a father. You're right, Victor said quietly, and the agreement caught her off guard. I can't switch it off, but I could have redirected it, could have used everything I am to keep you both safe instead of being left in the dark. Noah stirred in the bed, a small sound of distress escaping him. Both adults immediately fell silent, attention shifting. Elena moved to his side instantly, her hand gentle on his forehead. Shh, baby, it's okay. Mama's here. Noah's eyes fluttered open, still glazed with sleep and medication. Mama? Right here. How do you feel? Thirsty. Elena reached for the water cup on the bedside table, helping him take small sips through the straw. Victor watched the interaction with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, longing mixed with something that might have been grief. Noah's gaze drifted past Elena and landed on Victor. The boy's eyes widened slightly, a spark of recognition despite never having met this man before. You're the man from last night, Noah said, his voice still scratchy. The one Mama was yelling with. Victor's throat worked. Yes, Yes. Why were you yelling? The directness of childhood cutting through complexity to the simple question underneath. Because grown-ups sometimes disagree about important things, Elena said quickly, shooting Victor a warning look. But Noah's attention stayed fixed on Victor with unnerving focus. You look like my picture. Elena's blood froze. What picture, honey? The one in Mama's drawer, the man in the suit by the water. Noah's fever-bright eyes didn't leave Victor's face. Are you him? Elena's mouth went dry. She'd kept exactly one photograph from her old life, hidden in her underwear drawer where Noah should never have found it. A picture of Victor at some fundraising event, standing by the harbor in a perfectly tailored suit, looking every inch the powerful man he was. Noah, you shouldn't go through Mama's things. I was looking for socks, Noah said with the logic of 5-year-olds everywhere. But I saw the picture and Mama looked so happy in it. Why don't we have more pictures? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Victor's eyes found Elena's across the bed, and she saw the moment he understood. She'd kept a photograph. Despite everything, despite 5 years of running and hiding and pretending he didn't exist, she'd kept one picture. That's a conversation for when you're feeling better, Elena said, her voice strained. Right now you need to rest. But I want to know, Noah. The gentle firmness of a mother who knew how to redirect without crushing curiosity. Rest first, questions later. Noah's lower lip pushed out, but exhaustion was already pulling at him. Promise? I promise. The boy's eyes drifted closed again, his breathing evening out almost immediately. The medication and his body's need for healing were stronger than his curiosity. Elena released a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she adjusted Noah's blankets unnecessarily. When she finally looked up, Victor was staring at her with an intensity that made her want to run. You kept a picture, he said softly. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? Victor moved around the bed, close enough that Elena could smell his cologne, the same one he'd always worn, familiar and devastating. You kept a picture of us, of a time when you were happy with me. I kept a picture for Noah, Elena corrected, but her voice lacked conviction. in case he ever asked about his father. And what were you going to tell him when he got old enough to ask why his father wasn't in his life? Elena's hands twisted together. I don't know. The truth, eventually, that his father was a complicated man who lived a dangerous life. Complicated. Victor's laugh was hollow. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Honest. The word fell between them like a stone. I never lied to you about who I was, Elena. I never pretended to be something safe or easy. You knew what you were getting into. I was 19 years old. Elena's composure cracked. I was a kid who thought she was mature enough to handle your world. I didn't understand what I was signing up for until I was living it. Then you should have talked to me. Should have told me you were struggling instead of planning your escape. Would you have listened? The question came out raw. Would you have actually changed anything, or would you have just convinced me I was overreacting? Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer, he didn't know, sat unspoken between them. The moment stretched until a nurse entered, clipboard in hand and professional smile in place. Good morning. I need to check Noah's vitals and change his IV bag. Elena stepped back immediately, giving the nurse space. Victor retreated to the window, watching the city wake up while the medical routine played out behind him. When the nurse left with promises to return in a few hours, he turned back to find Elena slumped in her chair, exhaustion written in every line of her body. When's the last time you ate? He asked. I'm fine. Elena, his voice carried warning. Answer the question. She glared at him, but the defiance was undercut by the dark circles under her eyes. Yesterday afternoon, before I brought Noah in. Victor pulled out his phone and sent a text. Food will be here in 20 minutes, and before you argue, you're no good to Noah if you collapse from malnutrition. I don't care what you want. Victor's voice was flat. Our son needs his mother healthy, so you're going to eat, and then you're going to sleep for at least a few hours while I stay with him. Absolutely not. Elena stood, panic flashing across her features. I'm not leaving him alone with you. The words hit like a slap. Victor's jaw clenched, his eyes going hard. Alone with me, as if I'm some kind of threat to my own child. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Victor moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. You've spent 5 years painting me as the villain in your head, the dangerous man, the one who can't be trusted. So much so that you'd rather collapse from exhaustion than let me watch over him for a few hours. Elena's throat tightened. You're being unreasonable. I'm being unreasonable? Victor's voice rose despite his obvious effort to control it. I found out 12 hours ago that my son has been alive this entire time. 12 hours, Elena, and you're already acting like I'm going to hurt him the second you turn your back. That's not what I think. Then what do you think? The question was almost a shout. Because from where I'm standing, you've made it crystal clear that you trust your own paranoia more than you ever trusted me. The accusation hung between them, sharp and cutting. Elena wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat, because he wasn't entirely wrong. She had built Victor into a boogeyman in her mind, had taken her fear and shaped it into certainty that he represented danger. But she'd also lived with him, had seen the casual violence he was capable of, the cold calculations, the way he could switch from charming to terrifying in a heartbeat. Those weren't paranoid fantasies, those were memories. I've seen what you do to people who cross you, she said quietly. I've seen you destroy lives without blinking. Maybe I'm terrified because I have good reason to be. Victor's expression shifted, something that might have been pain flickering across his features before the mask slammed back down. I have never hurt someone who didn't pose a threat to me or mine. Every action I've taken, every decision I've made has been calculated and justified. Justified by whose standards? By the standards of survival in a world you never understood. Victor's voice was cold now, distant. You lived in my world for 2 years and saw only the surface. You have no idea what I've protected you from, what threats I've eliminated before you even knew they existed. Then tell me. Elena stepped closer, challenging. Explain it to me. Make me understand why the violence was necessary. You wouldn't believe me if I did. Try me. Victor stared at her, and for a moment Elena saw past the armor to the man underneath, exhausted, grieving, and impossibly alone. But then Noah stirred again, making a small sound of discomfort, and the moment shattered. Elena turned to their son immediately, her hand gentle on his forehead. Still no fever. That's good. Mama? Noah's voice was drowsy. Can I have pancakes? The absolute normalcy of the request made Elena want to laugh and cry simultaneously. When you're feeling better, baby. Right now, your stomach needs to stay calm. But I'm hungry. I know. The nurse said you can have some broth and crackers in a little while. Noah made a face but didn't argue further, his eyes already drifting closed again. Elena sat back down, her movements automatic, maternal instinct overriding her own exhaustion. Victor watched this exchange with an expression Elena couldn't decipher. When Noah was asleep again, Victor spoke quietly. He asks for what he wants, doesn't hedge or hide it. He's 5. Subtlety isn't exactly his strong suit yet. Good. Victor's voice was firm. I don't want him learning to hide what he needs, not like... He trailed off, but Elena understood. Not like you did. The unspoken words echoed anyway. A knock at the door interrupted them. A hospital staff member entered with 2 large bags from what was clearly an expensive restaurant. Mr. Russo, your order. Victor took the bags with a nod of dismissal, then set them on the table near Elena's chair. The smell of real food, not hospital cafeteria offerings, filled the room. Elena's stomach growled traitorously. Eat, Victor commanded, pulling out containers. And don't bother arguing. You're running on fumes, and we both know it. Elena wanted to refuse on principle, but the sight of actual food was too tempting. She'd been surviving on coffee and vending machine snacks for almost 24 hours. Her body overruled her pride. The first bite of scrambled eggs tasted like heaven. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Victor watched her for a moment, then pulled out his phone and stepped toward the door. I'll be right outside. Eat everything. When you're done, you're taking a shower and sleeping for 4 hours minimum. Victor, this isn't a negotiation, Elena. His voice was steel. I'm staying with Noah either way. You can do it willingly, or I can have hotel security escort you to one of the guest suites upstairs. Your choice. He left before she could respond, the door clicking shut with quiet finality. Elena sat alone with her food and her sleeping son, feeling the weight of the past 12 hours crash over her like a tsunami. Everything she'd built, every carefully constructed wall, every security measure, it had all collapsed the moment Victor walked into that emergency room. And the terrifying part was she didn't know what came next, didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if his promise to be better was real or just another form of control. All she knew was that running wasn't an option anymore. Victor knew about Noah, and men like Victor Russo didn't let go of what they considered theirs. Outside in the hallway, Victor leaned against the wall and fought for composure. Every instinct screamed at him to lock them both down, to move them somewhere he controlled completely, to eliminate any possibility of Elena running again. But he was smart enough to know that force would only drive her away permanently. If he wanted any chance of being part of Noah's life, of earning back what Elena's fear had stolen, he needed to be strategic, patient. He needed to prove he could change. The thought was foreign, uncomfortable. Victor Russo didn't change for anyone. He shaped the world to his will, not the other way around. But as he stood in that hospital hallway, the image of Noah's small face burned into his memory, Victor realized something fundamental had shifted. He would do whatever it took, learn whatever he needed to learn, become whoever he needed to be. Because losing them again wasn't an option he could survive. The decision to shower felt like surrender, but Elena's body won the argument her mind tried to make. Victor had arranged for a guest suite 3 doors down, complete with toiletries and fresh clothing in exactly her size. She didn't ask how he'd managed that in less than 2 hours. She was learning not to ask questions when the answers would only confirm how much power he still wielded. The hot water stripped away more than just physical exhaustion. Standing under the spray, Elena let herself feel the terror she'd been holding back since the moment Victor had spoken her name in that waiting room. She'd known this day might come, had rehearsed scenarios and escape routes, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of his eyes on their son, the raw devastation in his voice, the way 5 years of distance had collapsed into nothing the instant their worlds collided again. She dried off and found designer clothes laid out on the bed, jeans that fit perfectly, a soft sweater, undergarments still in packaging. The efficiency of it all made her skin crawl. This was Victor's world, a place where phone calls made miracles happen, where money solved every logistical problem, where the impossible became routine. When she returned to Noah's room 45 minutes later, she found Victor seated in her chair, a children's book open in his hands. He was reading aloud in a voice she'd never heard him use before, gentle, patient, engaging. Noah was awake and listening with rapt attention, his small face turned toward the stranger who somehow felt familiar. Elena froze in the doorway, her heart clenching at the sight. Victor looked up, their eyes meeting over Noah's head. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but perhaps the first fragile acknowledgement that they were locked into this together now, whether they liked it or not. "Mama." Noah's face lit up. This man knows all the voices. He did the dragon and the night and everything. Did he? Elena moved into the room, hyper-aware of Victor tracking her every movement. That sounds fun. He says his name is Victor. Noah pronounced it carefully, testing the syllables. That's a cool name. Elena's throat tightened. She met Victor's gaze again and saw the question there. How much do I tell him? Her slight headshake was almost imperceptible, but Victor caught it and gave the barest nod of acknowledgement. Not yet. They needed to figure this out first. It is a cool name, Elena agreed, settling onto the edge of the bed. How are you feeling, baby? Better? Victor says I have to stay here a few more days, though. Noah's disappointment was evident. I miss my room. I know, but the doctors need to make sure you're all better before we go home. Can Victor visit me? He's really good at voices. The simple request landed like a bomb. Elena felt Victor's attention sharpen, waiting for her response. She could say no, could shut this down before it started. But looking at Noah's hopeful face, at the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days, the refusal died in her throat. We'll see, she said instead, the parent's eternal non-answer. Noah accepted this with the resignation of a child who knew that phrase usually meant maybe, but probably not. He yawned hugely, the brief burst of energy already fading. You should rest, Victor said, closing the book. Your body needs sleep to heal. Will you read more later? If your mother says it's okay, yes. Noah's eyes found Elena's, pleading without words. She nodded, unable to deny him this small thing. Noah's smile was sunshine before his eyes drifted closed, exhaustion reclaiming him. Elena waited until his breathing evened out before speaking. You didn't have to do that. Read to my son? Victor's voice was carefully neutral. Why wouldn't I? You know what I mean. Do I? Victor stood, moving toward the window. You've made it clear you think I'm incapable of basic kindness. Maybe I'm trying to prove you wrong. Or maybe you're trying to win him over before I can explain who you really are. Victor's shoulders tensed. When he turned back, his expression was controlled, but his eyes blazed. And who am I really, Elena? Please, enlighten me. Am I the monster you've been telling yourself I am? The villain who justifies your decision to run? You're the man who runs a criminal empire, Elena said quietly, aware of Noah sleeping nearby. The man who's had people killed. The man whose enemies would use a child as leverage without hesitation. I'm also the man who built hospitals and funds scholarships and keeps half this city's economy running. Victor's voice was low but intense. I'm the man who could have hunted you down at any point in the last 5 years but didn't because I respected your grief. I'm the man who spent 12 hours trying to figure out how to be a father to a son. I didn't know existed instead of destroying you for stealing him from me. The threat embedded in that last sentence made Elena's pulse spike. Is that what you want? Revenge? What I want, Victor said, each word precisely delivered, is to know my son. What I want is to undo 5 years of damage that didn't have to happen. What I want is for you to stop looking at me like I'm about to hurt you when I have never, not once, raised a hand to you in anger. There are other ways to hurt people besides hitting them. Victor's jaw clenched. You're right. There are. And watching you walk away believing our child was dead? That hurt worse than any physical wound I've ever taken. So maybe we're even. Elena wanted to argue that they weren't even close to even, but the devastation that flickered across Victor's face stopped her. She'd been so focused on her own fear, her own justifications, that she hadn't really let herself consider what her deception had cost him. The image of Victor mourning a child who wasn't dead, grieving a future that hadn't actually been destroyed, it complicated the simple narrative she'd built where she was purely the victim and he was purely the threat. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said finally. "But you did it anyway." Victor's voice was flat. "You chose the option that destroyed me rather than trusting me enough to try." "I was scared." "I know." The admission seemed to cost him. "I know you were scared, but fear doesn't justify what you did, Elena. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse it." Before Elena could respond, the door opened and Dr. Harrison entered with a nurse. "Good morning. I hear our patient is doing much better." The interruption fractured the moment. Elena retreated to her chair while Victor stepped back, both of them watching as the medical team checked Noah's vitals and made notes on tablets. The nurse changed his IV bag with practiced efficiency while Dr. Harrison examined him gently. "Excellent progress," the doctor announced. "Temperature normal, lungs clearing nicely. I'd say we're on track for discharge in 2 to 3 days if this trajectory continues." "And after discharge?" Victor asked. "What kind of care will he need?" "Rest, mainly. Light activity for another week, finish the course of oral antibiotics, a follow-up appointment in 10 days to ensure everything's cleared completely." Dr. Harrison glanced between them. "Will he be recovering at home, or—" The question hung weighted in the air. Elena opened her mouth to say, of course he'd be coming home with her, but Victor spoke first. "That's still being determined," he said smoothly. "We'll let you know." Dr. Harrison, wisely reading the tension, simply nodded. "Of course. We'll continue monitoring his progress. Call if you need anything." When the medical team left, Elena turned on Victor with barely controlled fury. "Excuse me? Still being determined?" "Keep your voice down," Victor said mildly, glancing at Noah. "Don't tell me what to do. He's coming home with me when he's discharged." "To that apartment in Riverside?" Victor's voice was deceptively calm. "The one in the building that failed safety inspections? Where you'll go back to working double shifts and leaving him with whatever babysitter you can afford while you're gone?" "That's my life." "It was your life," Victor corrected. "Past tense. Everything changed the moment you walked into my hospital with my son." Elena felt ice slide down her spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that things are different now. I'm saying that Noah deserves better than scraping by. I'm saying that you don't get to make unilateral decisions about his welfare anymore. You can't just take him from me." "Can't I?" Victor's eyes were cold steel. "I have unlimited resources, Elena. I have lawyers who could bury you in paperwork. I have evidence that you've been raising him in poverty when his father has more than enough wealth to provide for him. I have documented proof that you faked his death and kept him from me for 5 years." Elena's hands trembled. "You wouldn't." "Tell me why I wouldn't." Victor moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "Give me one good reason why I should let you walk out of here with him when you've proven you can't be trusted." "Because I'm his mother." The words came out choked. "Because he loves me and needs me, and you trying to take him away would destroy him." "Then don't make me take him." Victor's voice dropped to something almost gentle. "Work with me instead of against me. Let me help. Let me provide for him properly." "In exchange for what?" Elena's voice was bitter. "My freedom? My autonomy? Accepting whatever terms you dictate?" "In exchange for letting me be his father." The raw honesty in Victor's voice caught her off guard. "That's all I want, Elena. A chance to know my son. To be part of his life. To give him the things you can't give him alone." "Things like what? Money? Your name? An inheritance built on blood?" "Things like security," Victor shot back. "Medical care without worrying about the bill, education, opportunities, a future that isn't defined by struggling to survive." Elena wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat because he wasn't wrong. She'd been giving Noah everything she had, but everything she had wasn't much. She'd watched him wear shoes until they fell apart because new ones weren't in the budget. She'd packed him lunches of whatever was on sale because organic food was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd lied about why he couldn't do activities other kids did, why birthday parties had to be small, why Christmas meant one modest gift instead of the pile he saw advertised. She told herself love was enough, that stability mattered more than stuff, that she was protecting him from something worse. But what if she'd been wrong? "I need time," she said finally, her voice small. "I need to think." "You have until he's discharged." Victor's tone was implacable. "3 days to decide whether we do this cooperatively or whether I force the issue legally." "That's not enough time. It's more than you gave me." The words were quiet but devastating. "You made a life-changing decision in seconds and didn't look back. I'm giving you 3 days. That's generous considering." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, I don't want to fight you, Elena. I don't want to take Noah away from you, but I won't be shut out of his life again. So figure out what matters more, your pride or his well-being, and make your choice accordingly." The door closed behind him with quiet finality, leaving Elena alone with her sleeping son and the wreckage of her carefully constructed world. She sank into the chair and let her head fall into her hands. 3 days. 72 hours to decide whether to trust the man she'd spent 5 years running from or to fight a battle she almost certainly couldn't win. The mathematics of power were brutally simple. Victor had resources she couldn't match, connections she couldn't compete with, and legitimate grievances that any court would consider. He also had the law on his side. She'd hidden his child, used a false name, denied him parental rights. Even without the criminal implications of her deception, the civil case alone could destroy her. But beyond the legal calculus was something more fundamental. Noah deserved better than what she could give him alone. She'd been telling herself that love was enough, but love didn't pay medical bills or provide security or open doors to futures she couldn't access. Victor could give their son things she'd only ever dreamed of. The question was whether the cost was too high. Elena looked at Noah sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with healthy breaths, and tried to imagine telling him the truth someday. Tried to imagine explaining that she'd had the chance to give him stability, education, opportunity, and had refused it because she was too proud or too scared to accept help from his father. The image made her feel sick. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe her fear had blinded her to other options. Maybe running had seemed like the only choice because she'd refused to consider alternatives that required vulnerability. But trusting Victor meant accepting that he could hurt her again, meant opening herself up to the specific terror of loving someone whose world was fundamentally dangerous, meant gambling Noah's safety on Victor's promise to be different. She didn't know if she was brave enough for that. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The nurse from earlier entered with a shy smile. "Sorry to bother you. Mr. Russo asked me to bring you this." She held out a business card. Elena took it automatically, then stared at the name embossed in elegant script. Margaret Chen, family attorney. "Mr. Russo said to tell you that if you want legal advice about your options, Ms. Chen will represent you at his expense. No strings attached. She's one of the best family law attorneys in the state." The nurse left before Elena could respond. She sat holding the card, trying to process this development. Victor was offering to pay for a lawyer to advise her against him? It made no strategic sense. Unless it did. Unless this was Victor demonstrating that he could afford to be generous because the outcome was inevitable anyway. Or unless he genuinely wanted her to understand her position clearly before making a decision. The uncertainty was maddening. Elena's phone buzzed. She'd turned it to silent when they'd admitted Noah, but she'd been checking it periodically for messages from her boss, her neighbors, anyone who might wonder where she'd disappeared to. This message was from an unknown number. "This is Margaret Chen. Mr. Russo gave me your contact information. I'm available to discuss your situation at your convenience with complete confidentiality. You're under no obligation to work with Mr. Russo, and anything you tell me is protected by attorney-client privilege. Call anytime." Elena stared at the message, her mind racing. This was manipulation, had to be. Victor positioning himself as reasonable and generous while backing her into a corner. Except the lawyer was offering to represent her against him, was offering confidentiality. was giving her information and options. Maybe this was what cooperation looked like. Maybe this was Victor's version of compromise, overwhelming force tempered by the opportunity to negotiate. She looked at Noah again, her heart aching. He deserved a father, deserved security, deserved to not grow up wondering why his mother had kept him from someone who clearly wanted to know him. But he also deserved a mother who could protect him, who understood the dangers of Victor's world and could navigate them without being consumed. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where both things were true, where Victor was part of Noah's life, but her agency wasn't completely erased, where they found a way to coexist without destroying each other. It seemed impossible, but maybe impossible was better than the alternative. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Margaret Chen had provided. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. "This is Margaret." "Hi, this is Elena Vance, or Elena Russo. I don't actually know which name to use anymore." The admission felt like defeat. "Elena is fine." Margaret's voice was warm but businesslike. "I'm glad you called. I've reviewed the situation as Mr. Russo described it, but I'd like to hear your perspective. Are you somewhere we can talk privately?" Elena glanced at Noah, still sleeping. "More or less." "Then let's start with the basics. What do you want the outcome of this situation to be?" The question was so direct it caught Elena off guard. I want Noah to be safe and happy." "That's a given. Every parent wants that. I'm asking what you want for yourself. What does a good outcome look like from your perspective?" Elena tried to put it into words. "I want to be able to make decisions about my son's life. I want to not live in fear that Victor will take him from me. I want Noah to have stability and security, but not at the cost of losing his mother." "Those are reasonable goals," Margaret paused. "Now, let me ask you something harder. Do you believe Mr. Russo when he says he wants to be part of Noah's life?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I believe he thinks he wants it right now. But Victor's track record with commitment to anything other than his business isn't great." "Fair assessment. But here's what I need you to understand. Legally, Mr. Russo has significant leverage. He has grounds for a paternity suit, potential fraud charges related to the falsified death claim, and enough resources to make a custody battle extremely expensive for you. If he wanted to crush you legally, he could." Elena's chest tightened. "So you're saying I have no options?" "I'm saying you have fewer options than you'd like, but more than you might think. Mr. Russo offering to pay for my services suggests he's not looking for total war. That gives us room to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "A custody arrangement that protects your parental rights while acknowledging his. Legal safeguards that prevent him from unilaterally taking Noah. Financial support that doesn't come with strings attached to your autonomy. The details matter, and that's where I come in." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Someone was offering to help her navigate this, to fight for her interests even against Victor's power. It felt like the first solid ground she'd found since this nightmare began. "What do I need to do?" "First, meet with me in person, tomorrow if possible. We'll go through everything. Your history with Mr. Russo, the circumstances of Noah's birth, your life over the past 5 years. Then we'll build a strategy that maximizes your leverage in negotiations." "I don't have leverage." "You have Noah's well-being and happiness, which Mr. Russo clearly cares about. You have 5 years of successful parenting. You have the moral high ground on actually being present for your son's entire life. Don't underestimate what that's worth." After the call ended, Elena felt fractionally better. Still terrified, still uncertain, but no longer completely powerless. Margaret had given her something to work with, a framework for thinking about the situation beyond just panic and surrender. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Noah had woken up until his small hand touched her arm. "Mama, why do you look sad?" Elena forced a smile. "Just tired, baby. How are you feeling?" "Hungry, really hungry this time." "That's a good sign. Let me call the nurse and see about getting you some real food." Noah's eyes brightened, then grew thoughtful. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is Victor my dad?" The question stopped Elena's heart. She stared at her son, trying to figure out how he'd made that leap. "Why would you ask that?" "Because he looks like my picture, and because you got that look you get when you're trying not to cry. You only get that look about important stuff." Noah's 5-year-old logic was devastatingly accurate. Elena sat on the edge of his bed, taking his small hand in hers. Baby, this is complicated. That's what you always say when the answer is yes, but you don't want to tell me yet. She almost laughed despite everything. When had her son gotten so perceptive? You're too smart for your own good. So he is my dad. Noah's expression was serious, processing. Is that why we had to leave before? Because of him? No. We left because Mama needed to keep you safe, and I thought leaving was the best way to do that. But we're not leaving now? Elena's throat tightened. I don't know what happens now. Noah was quiet for a moment, then said something that broke her heart. I think you should let him stay. He's really good at voices, and he seems nice. Noah, there's a lot you don't understand. I know? His interruption was gentle. But you're always saying that I need to give people a chance before I decide I don't like them. Maybe you should too. The wisdom of children, cutting through complexity to simple truth. Elena wanted to explain all the reasons why Victor was different, why adult relationships were more complicated than playground friendships. But looking at Noah's hopeful face, she couldn't find the words. I'll think about it, she said instead. Okay. Noah seemed satisfied with this. Can we call the nurse now? I'm really hungry. Elena called for the nurse, grateful for the distraction of normal parental tasks. While Noah ate applesauce and crackers with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been denied food for days, Elena's mind churned through possibilities and scenarios. 3 days to decide. 72 hours to determine the course of all their futures. She thought about Margaret's words, leverage and negotiation, protecting rights while acknowledging realities. She thought about Victor's devastation, the 5 years of grief she'd caused. She thought about Noah's simple request to give his father a chance. And she thought about the photograph she'd kept hidden in a drawer for 5 years, the one Noah had found, the one that captured a moment when she'd been genuinely happy with Victor, before fear had twisted everything into threat. Maybe there was a path forward. Maybe it required more courage than running ever had. Maybe trust was harder than escape, but ultimately necessary. Or maybe she was delusional, and 3 days from now she'd be trapped in a nightmare with no exit. Elena didn't have answers. But for the first time since Victor had walked back into her life, she had the beginning of a plan. And that was something. Outside in the parking garage, Victor sat in his car and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The conversation with Elena had taken every ounce of control he possessed. He'd wanted to rage, to demand, to use every weapon in his arsenal to ensure he never lost Noah again. But he'd held back, had offered cooperation instead of conquest, had given Elena resources to fight him because the alternative, crushing her and traumatizing their son in the process, was unacceptable. His phone rang. Marcus Chen, right on schedule. Talk to me, Victor said. Margaret's on the phone with Elena now. Should have preliminary assessment within the hour. Marcus paused. You sure about this? Giving her ammunition to use against you? I'm sure. Victor closed his eyes. This only works if she chooses it, Marcus. Force will give me legal custody, but cost me everything that actually matters. You've changed. Not yet, but I'm trying to. The meeting with Margaret Chen happened the next morning in a conference room the hospital made available at Victor's request. Elena had left Noah with a pediatric nurse who specialized in keeping sick children entertained, though leaving him even for an hour felt like abandoning her post. Margaret was in her late 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competence that immediately put Elena at ease. She'd brought a leather portfolio and a recording device, which she set on the table between them. Everything we discuss is confidential, Margaret began, even from Mr. Russo, who's paying my retainer. My loyalty is to you and your interests. Understood? Elena nodded, something tight in her chest loosening slightly. Good. Now tell me everything, starting from the beginning. How did you meet Victor? The story spilled out haltingly at first, then faster as Margaret's neutral expression gave her courage. Elena described being 19 and working as a hostess at an upscale restaurant Victor frequented. How he'd been charming and attentive in ways that made her feel special. How she'd ignored the warnings from coworkers who knew his reputation, convinced she could handle whatever darkness lurked beneath his polish. I thought I was mature enough, Elena said, her voice thick with old shame. I thought love could fix anything. I was so stupid. You were 19, Margaret corrected gently. Young people make decisions based on limited information and hormones. That doesn't make you stupid. Elena continued, describing the early months of their relationship, the intensity, the possessiveness she'd mistaken for passion, the gradual realization that Victor's world operated by rules she didn't understand. She talked about the wedding, small and private because Victor didn't want spectacle, about moving into his penthouse and feeling simultaneously like a princess and a prisoner. Did he abuse you? Margaret asked bluntly. Not physically, never physically. Elena struggled to articulate the more subtle violations. But he was controlling. He needed to know where I was always, who I was talking to, what I was doing. He said it was for my protection, and maybe it was, but it felt like suffocation. Did you ever try to leave before the pregnancy? Elena shook her head. I thought about it, but I'd burned bridges with my family when I married him against their advice. I had no money of my own. He gave me credit cards but monitored the spending, and part of me still loved him, even while I was afraid. Margaret made notes without judgment. Tell me about discovering you were pregnant. The memory brought tears to Elena's eyes. I was terrified, not of being a mother, but of bringing a child into that world. Victor's enemies, the constant danger, the violence that he pretended didn't exist but that I saw evidence of constantly. And I started thinking about what kind of father he'd be. Would he teach our son that power matters more than kindness? That fear is a tool? That people are assets or threats, but never just people? So you planned your escape. I started hiding cash. Small amounts that wouldn't be noticed. I researched how to disappear. And when Victor had to go overseas for 2 weeks and left minimal security because he thought I was compliant enough by then, I took my chance. Elena's hands twisted together. I called him from a burner phone and told him I'd lost the baby. I made myself sob, made it sound real, and then I destroyed everything that could track me and started over. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. That took enormous courage. Or enormous cowardice, depending on how you look at it. No, Margaret's voice was firm. You were a pregnant woman with no resources trying to protect yourself and your child from a situation you perceived as dangerous. That's survival, not cowardice. The validation made Elena's eyes burn. She'd spent 5 years second-guessing herself, wondering if she'd overreacted, if fear had made her cruel. Hearing someone else acknowledge the impossible position she'd been in loosened something in her chest. Walk me through the past 5 years, Margaret said. How did you manage? Elena described the hand-to-mouth existence, the constant vigilance, the exhaustion of being a single mother with no support system. She talked about changing cities twice when paranoia got too intense, about teaching Noah to be unremarkable, about the grinding poverty that came with minimum wage jobs and false identities. And in all that time, Victor never found you? I was careful. No social media, no credit in my real name, cash only when possible. I stayed in cities big enough to disappear in, but small enough that his organization wouldn't have significant presence. Elena paused. I got lucky, basically, and my luck ran out the night Noah got sick. Margaret reviewed her notes. Here's my assessment. Legally, Mr. Russo has grounds for multiple actions against you. Paternity fraud, potential kidnapping charges given you crossed state lines, with a minor he had parental rights to, emotional distress damages. In a courtroom, those facts don't look good for you. Elena's stomach dropped. So I have no chance. I didn't say that. I said the facts don't look good in isolation, but context matters. You were young, isolated, frightened, and legitimately concerned for your safety. You've been a devoted single parent for 5 years with no support. You've kept Noah healthy, safe, and clearly well-adjusted. That counts for something. Enough to win? Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. Enough to negotiate from a position that isn't complete surrender. Mr. Russo wants a relationship with his son. You want to retain your parental rights and autonomy. There's common ground there if both parties are willing to compromise. What kind of compromise? That depends on what you're willing to accept. Joint custody with structured visitation? Relocation to housing Mr. Russo provides but doesn't control? Financial support with clear boundaries? The specifics are negotiable, but you need to decide what your non-negotiables are. Elena tried to imagine any scenario where she willingly let Victor back into their lives. What if he uses his resources to manipulate the situation? What if he pretends to cooperate but gradually takes over? That's where legal safeguards come in. We draft agreements with teeth, clear custody arrangements, financial transparency, consequences for violations. We make it more expensive for him to break the agreement than to honor it. Can you actually bind someone like Victor to an agreement? Yes, Margaret said with confidence, because the leverage isn't just legal, it's reputational. Mr. Russo has spent years building a public image as a businessman and philanthropist. A nasty custody battle where he's portrayed as a controlling monster trying to destroy his son's mother. That damages his carefully constructed facade. Elena hadn't considered that angle. Victor cared deeply about his public image, about being seen as civilized rather than savage. A court battle would expose aspects of his life he preferred to keep private. So we have leverage, Elena said slowly, more than you think. But here's what I need to know. Do you want to negotiate or do you want to fight? Because those are different strategies with different outcomes. Elena thought about Noah asking if Victor could visit again. Thought about her son's simple wisdom about giving people chances. Thought about the photograph she'd kept hidden for 5 years. I want to negotiate, she said finally, but I need protection. I need to know I'm not signing away my ability to protect Noah if things go bad. Fair. Give me 24 hours to draft a proposal. We'll build in escape clauses, review periods, and escalation procedures. If Mr. Russo violates the terms, you have recourse that doesn't require trusting his goodwill. They spent another hour hammering out details. What Elena needed financially, what kind of custody arrangement she could accept, how to handle Noah's education and medical decisions. By the time they finished, Elena felt wrung out but marginally more hopeful. One more thing, Margaret said as they prepared to leave. Mr. Russo asked me to tell you that he's arranging security for you and Noah, regardless of whether you accept his other offers. He said there are people who might target Noah if they discover his existence, and he won't take chances with his son's safety. Elena's first instinct was to refuse, but pragmatism overrode pride. What kind of security? Discreet surveillance, vetted bodyguards when you're in public, secure transportation. Nothing that would make Noah feel like he's under house arrest, but enough to deter threats. The thought of being watched constantly made Elena's skin crawl, but the alternative, Noah being vulnerable because of who his father was worse. Fine, but I want details about who's watching us and what information they're reporting back to Victor. I'll make sure that's specified in the agreement. When Elena returned to Noah's room, she found Victor there again, this time showing Noah something on a tablet. They both looked up when she entered, and the resemblance between them was so striking it hurt. Mama, Victor's showing me videos of baby sea turtles. Noah's excitement was infectious. Did you know they have to walk all the way to the ocean by themselves when they're born? I did know that, Elena said, her eyes meeting Victor's over Noah's head. Pretty amazing, right? Victor says sometimes people help them if birds try to eat them. That's nice. Sometimes people need help, Victor said, his gaze still locked with Elena's. Doesn't mean they're weak. Just means the world is dangerous and we all need allies. The message was clear enough. Elena moved to Noah's other side, brushing his hair back from his forehead. His fever had been gone for more than 24 hours now, his color good, his energy returning. How are you feeling, baby? Good. Dr. Harrison said maybe I can have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow. Noah's enthusiasm for pancakes was undiminished by illness. That's great news. Noah yawned despite his excitement, the medication and healing still demanding rest. Can you both stay while I sleep? The request caught both adults off guard. Elena saw Victor's throat work, saw him struggle with some emotion too big to name. She wanted to say no, wanted to maintain the boundaries that had kept her safe for 5 years. But looking at Noah's hopeful face, she found herself nodding. For a little while. Noah's smile was radiant. He settled back against his pillows, his hand reaching for Elena's by habit. Tell me a story. What kind of story? One about dragons, but nice dragons, not scary ones. Elena began weaving a tale about a dragon who was afraid of his own fire and learned to use it to help people instead of hurt them. It wasn't subtle as metaphors went, but Noah had always loved dragon stories. His eyes drifted closed before she'd gotten halfway through, his breathing evening into sleep. Victor hadn't moved from his position on the opposite side of the bed. When Elena finished the story anyway, she always completed stories even after Noah fell asleep. Silence settled heavy between them. "He's resilient," Victor said quietly. "You've done well with him." The compliment surprised her. "Thank you." "I mean it. Whatever else is true, you've been a good mother to him." Elena's throat tightened. "I tried. I didn't always succeed, but I tried." That's all any parent can do." Victor's eyes remained on Noah. "I've missed so much. First words, first steps, all of it. I know. The admission cost her. I know what I took from you." "Do you?" Victor finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. "Can you actually understand what it's like to mourn a child who wasn't dead? To grieve a future that still existed but was kept from you?" "No," Elena said honestly. "I can't. But I understand that I hurt you, and that my fear doesn't completely excuse that." Victor seemed to deflate slightly, some of the rigid anger leaving his posture. "I don't know how to do this, Elena. I don't know how to be a father to a child who doesn't know me. I don't know the rules or the boundaries or what I'm supposed to do." The vulnerability in his voice shocked her. She'd never heard Victor admit to not knowing something, to being uncertain or afraid. "Neither did I when Noah was born. You figure it out as you go." "You had 5 years to figure it out. I have 3 days before he's discharged, and then what? Do I visit on weekends? Do I take him to my place sometimes? Do I just remain this stranger who shows up occasionally?" "I met with Margaret this morning," Elena said, making a decision. "We're drafting a custody proposal, something that gives you real access to Noah while protecting both of us." Victor's attention sharpened. "What kind of proposal?" "I don't have all the details yet, but the basic idea is joint legal custody with structured visitation that increases over time as Noah adjusts. Financial support that doesn't come with strings, legal protections for everyone involved." "You're willing to negotiate?" It wasn't a question, but something in Victor's voice suggested he'd been bracing for total war. "I'm willing to try, for Noah's sake." Elena paused. "But I need you to understand something. If you hurt him, if your world touches him in ways that damage him, I will do whatever it takes to protect him, even if that means running again." "I wouldn't hurt him. Not intentionally. But your enemies exist, Victor. The danger is real. So if we do this, you need to be willing to make changes. Real changes, not just promises." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of changes?" "I don't know yet. That's what we negotiate. But it has to be real. It has to be verifiable. And if you can't commit to putting Noah first, above your business, above your pride, above whatever empire you've built, then this won't work." "You think I can't put him first?" "I think you've spent your entire adult life in a world where strength means never backing down, and vulnerability is weakness. Being a parent requires different strength." Victor's jaw clenched. "You're asking me to change who I am. I'm asking you to grow into someone new. There's a difference." The distinction seemed to strike something in Victor. He looked at Noah sleeping peacefully between them, small and innocent, and completely unaware of the negotiations happening over his future. "Tell me what that looks like," Victor said finally. "Tell me what you need to see to believe I'm serious." Elena had been thinking about this since her conversation with Margaret. "I need you to step back from the parts of your business that put you at risk. I need you to prove that Noah's safety matters more than profit or power. And I need you to be honest with me about threats instead of hiding them, because you think I can't handle the truth. Those are significant asks. I'm trusting you with my son. That's a significant risk." Victor absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "I'll need time. Some of the changes you're asking for can't happen overnight. I understand that, but I need to see you trying. Need to see evidence that you're serious about this." "Fair enough." Victor stood, moving toward the door. "I have some calls to make. When Margaret has the proposal ready, I want to review it with my own lawyers before we finalize anything." "I expected that." Victor paused at the door, looking back at Noah one more time. "He asked me this morning if I was his father." I told him that was something you and I needed to discuss with him together. Elena's heart clenched. Thank you for not going behind my back. I meant what I said before. I don't want to fight you, but I need you to meet me halfway. I'm trying. Try harder. The words could have been harsh, but Victor's tone was almost pleading. Because I can't lose him again, Elena. I physically cannot survive that. He left before she could respond, leaving her alone with their sleeping son and the weight of impossible choices. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Noah continued improving, his strength returning, his laughter filling the hospital room in ways that made the medical staff smile. Victor visited multiple times each day, always bringing something: books, puzzles, more videos of animals on his tablet. He was careful, Elena noticed, to never overstep, to always defer to her on questions of what Noah could eat or do. They were learning to orbit each other, finding a careful distance that felt safe for both of them. Sometimes their conversations were stiffly polite. Sometimes they slipped into arguments that had to be cut short because Noah was listening. And sometimes, rarely, but it happened, they found themselves talking almost naturally, remembering how they'd once been able to finish each other's sentences. Margaret delivered the custody proposal on the evening of Noah's second full day of recovery. Elena read it 3 times, looking for traps or loopholes, but Margaret had been thorough. Joint legal custody with primary physical custody remaining, with Elena initially. Visitation schedules that started small and increased incrementally. Financial support calculated based on actual need rather than Victor's total wealth, with annual reviews. Mediation requirements before either party could go to court. Clear protocols for emergencies, relocations, and major life changes. There were protections for Elena. She couldn't be forced to relocate without her consent. She maintained final say on medical and educational decisions until Noah was older, and she had recourse if Victor violated the agreement. But there were also protections for Victor: guaranteed access to Noah, participation in major life events, the right to be informed of any threats to his son's well-being. It was fair in ways Elena hadn't expected, equitable, designed to give them both what they needed while protecting Noah from being used as a weapon. "What do you think?" Margaret asked over the phone. "It's better than I hoped for," Elena admitted. "But will Victor accept it?" "He's reviewing it with his lawyers now. I'll know by tomorrow morning." The waiting was agony. Elena tried to distract herself with Noah, with books, with anything that would stop her mind from spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if Victor rejected the proposal and pushed for full custody? What if his lawyers found ways to twist the language against her? What if this was all a setup and she was walking into a trap? The knock on the door came late that evening after Noah had fallen asleep. Elena opened it to find Victor standing in the hallway, looking exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Elena stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I reviewed the proposal." Victor ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered from their marriage. "It's fair. More than fair. My lawyers found nothing objectionable." Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly. "So you'll sign it?" "With one addition." Her wariness returned immediately. "What addition?" "I want counseling. For all of us. You, me, and eventually Noah when he's old enough to participate. I want a professional helping us navigate this because I don't trust either of us to manage it alone." The suggestion was so unexpected Elena could only stare. "You want therapy?" "I want our son to have parents who can communicate without destroying each other. If that requires professional help, then yes, I want therapy." Victor's voice was steady. "This is too important to screw up because of our egos." Elena tried to process this. Victor Russo, suggesting therapy. Victor, who'd always scorned anything that smacked of vulnerability or admitting weakness, was proposing they get professional help. "Okay," she said slowly. "I can agree to that." "Good. Then I'll sign the proposal tomorrow and we can start figuring out what comes next." "Just like that?" Victor's smile was bitter. "Just like that. You asked me to change, Elena. This is me trying." He started to walk away, then turned back. "One more thing. I've been making calls, reorganizing my business structure. It'll take time to fully implement, but I'm divesting from the parts of my operations that carry the most risk, transitioning to exclusively legitimate enterprises. Elena's breath caught. You're serious? I'm serious. Noah deserves a father who doesn't have to worry about being killed by rivals or arrested by federal agents. So I'm building something different, something cleaner. Victor, that's a massive undertaking. I'm aware, but you were right. Being a father requires different choices than being who I've been. He met her eyes directly. I can't undo the past, can't bring back the 5 years I lost, but I can choose who I am from this point forward. The sincerity in his voice made Elena's chest ache. This was the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, the one who could be thoughtful and honest when he let his guard down, the one she'd believed could be better than his circumstances. Thank you, she said quietly, for trying. Don't thank me yet. I'm going to screw this up sometimes. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to learn from them instead of running the first time I fail. I can do that. Elena paused. As long as you're honest with me, as long as you don't hide threats or make decisions that affect Noah without consulting me. Deal. Victor extended his hand formally, and after a moment's hesitation, Elena shook it. The contact sent electricity through her, muscle memory of touches that had once been commonplace. She pulled back quickly, but not before she saw recognition in Victor's eyes. He'd felt it too, the echo of what they'd once been to each other. I should get back to Noah, she said, needing distance. Of course. I'll see you tomorrow. We can tell him together if you want. About me being his father. The thought terrified and relieved her in equal measure. Yeah, together. Elena slipped back into the room and stood watching Noah sleep, her mind churning. She'd expected a battle, expected Victor to use his power to crush her resistance. Instead, he was negotiating, compromising, changing. The question was whether it would last, whether the changes were genuine or just strategic moves in a longer game. She didn't have answers. But tomorrow, they'd sign the custody agreement. Tomorrow, they'd tell Noah the truth. And tomorrow would be the first day of whatever came next. Outside in his car, Victor sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Every instinct screamed at him to take control, to force the situation into a shape he could manage. But Elena was right. The old strategies wouldn't work here. Force would drive her away permanently. Control would poison any chance of actually being Noah's father instead of just a name on legal documents. So he was trying something foreign and uncomfortable. Trust, vulnerability, letting someone else have power over outcomes that mattered desperately to him. It went against everything he'd built his life on. But as Marcus had said, he was changing. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The morning of Noah's discharge arrived with surprising normalcy. Dr. Harrison declared him fully recovered and ready to go home with prescriptions for antibiotics and stern instructions about rest and follow-up appointments. Noah was thrilled to be leaving, bouncing with energy that had been absent for days. Can we get pancakes on the way home? He asked Elena while she packed his few belongings. We'll see, Elena said automatically, then caught Victor's eye. They'd agreed to tell Noah together, but she hadn't anticipated doing it before leaving the hospital. Victor seemed to read her uncertainty. He moved to sit on the edge of Noah's bed, his posture careful. Hey, Noah, before we leave, your mom and I need to talk to you about something important. Noah's expression grew serious with the gravity children sense in adult tones. Am I in trouble? No, baby, Elena said quickly, sitting on his other side. Nothing like that. But we need to tell you something true and important. Noah looked between them, his eyes wide. Is it about Victor being my dad? Because I already figured that out. Both adults froze. Elena recovered first. You did? Yeah. You look sad when you look at him the same way you look sad when you look at my picture. And he looks at me like I'm really important. Plus we have the same nose. Noah touched his nose demonstratively. Everyone at school says kids look like their parents. Elena felt tears threaten. Her brilliant, perceptive son had already assembled the truth from fragments and feelings. You're right. Victor is your father. Noah turned to Victor with complete seriousness. Do I have to call you Dad? The question clearly caught Victor off guard. You can call me whatever feels comfortable. Victor is fine. Dad is fine. We have time to figure it out. Okay, Noah processed this with 5-year-old pragmatism. So, are you and Mama getting married again? No, Elena said quickly. Perhaps too quickly. No, we're not. But we're going to work together to take care of you. So I'll see him sometimes, like Tommy sees his dad on weekends? Something like that, Victor said. We're still figuring out the details, but yes, you'll see me regularly, if that's okay with you. Noah considered this gravely. Will you read me more stories? As many as you want. And show me more animal videos? Absolutely. And can we get a dog? Victor's laugh was surprised and genuine. That's something you'll need to discuss with your mother. Noah turned pleading eyes on Elena. Please? I've always wanted a dog, and now that I have a dad, maybe we can afford one? The innocent question highlighted the poverty they'd been living in, and Elena saw Victor's expression tighten with something that looked like guilt. We'll talk about it, she said diplomatically. That means probably not, Noah informed Victor sadly. But it's okay. I understand that dogs are expensive. The matter-of-fact acceptance of deprivation broke something in Victor's carefully maintained composure. We're going to make some changes, he said, his voice rough. You won't have to worry about things being too expensive anymore. Noah brightened immediately, the resilience of childhood on full display. Really? So maybe a dog is possible? Maybe, Victor agreed, shooting Elena a look that promised they'd discuss this later. A nurse arrived with discharge papers and a wheelchair, hospital policy for all departing patients, regardless of how well they could walk. Noah climbed in with enthusiasm, treating it like an adventure rather than a medical necessity. As they made their way through the hospital hallways, Elena felt reality setting in. They were leaving the contained environment where rules had been clear and roles defined. Now they'd be navigating real life, figuring out custody exchanges, dealing with questions from Noah's school, explaining their situation to a world that wouldn't understand. Victor's security team materialized as they reached the main entrance. Elena recognized this as the new normal. Bodyguards and drivers and layers of protection she'd spent 5 years trying to avoid. The car will take you both home, Victor said, and there's something there you should see. Elena's wariness returned. What did you do? Nothing invasive, just preparation for the conversation we're going to have about where you live. The drive to her apartment felt surreal with Noah chattering happily about everything he wanted to do now that he felt better. When they pulled up to her building, Elena immediately noticed the changes. The broken front door had been repaired, the graffiti on the exterior walls had been cleaned, there were new lights in the parking lot. You had my building renovated? Elena didn't know whether to be grateful or angry. I had the building brought up to code, Victor corrected. The landlord was violating multiple safety regulations. I made sure they were corrected. Elena wanted to argue, but looking at the improved exterior, she couldn't quite work up the energy. The building had been a dump. If Victor had made it safer, that benefited everyone who lived there. Inside her apartment, more changes awaited. Nothing dramatic. Her furniture and belongings were untouched. But there were new smoke detectors. The locks on the door had been upgraded, and the leak in her ceiling had been patched. This is weird, Noah announced, looking around. Everything looks the same, but different. It's just some fixes, baby. Why don't you go play in your room while Victor and I talk? Noah ran off happily, leaving the adults alone in her small living room. Elena turned to Victor, trying to articulate her complicated feelings. You can't just fix everything with money, she said. I'm not trying to fix everything. I'm trying to make sure my son isn't living somewhere dangerous. This is my home, and it can remain your home, Victor interrupted. I'm not asking you to move, but I'm asking you to let me make it safe. Is that really so unreasonable? Elena sank onto her worn couch, exhaustion catching up with her. No, it's not unreasonable. I'm not used to accepting help. I'm aware. Victor sat in the chair across from her, maintaining distance. But that's going to have to change. You're not alone anymore, Elena. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. The words shouldn't have affected her so strongly, but 5 years of being the only adult, the only decision-maker, the only one responsible for Noah's well-being, it had been crushing. The idea of sharing that burden felt both dangerous and desperately appealing. We signed the custody agreement, she said, instead of addressing the emotional weight. So what happens now? Now we start figuring out what co-parenting looks like. Victor pulled out his phone. I've had my assistant draft a proposed schedule for the first month. Nothing aggressive, a few hours twice a week to start, building up to overnight visits once Noah's comfortable. He showed her the schedule, and Elena was surprised again by how reasonable it was. Victor was giving Noah time to adjust, not demanding immediate full access. This works, she admitted. Good, and I've set up a bank account in your name, child support as specified in the agreement, plus additional funds for Noah's needs. Elena's pride bristled. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's basic responsibility. I should have been supporting my son for the past 5 years. This is me making up for lost time. Victor. Elena. His voice was firm. You can't have it both ways. You can't ask me to be Noah's father and then refuse to let me provide for him. That's not how this works. He was right, damn him. She nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I maintain control over how the money is spent. Agreed. I trust your judgment. The simple statement of trust caught her off guard. Victor had many qualities, but trusting others had never been his strong suit. Thank you. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Noah's voice called from his bedroom. Mama, can Victor come see my room? Elena almost said no reflexively, but caught herself. This was what co-parenting meant, sharing spaces and moments, letting Victor into parts of their life she'd kept private. Yeah, baby. He can come see. Victor stood and followed Elena down the short hallway to Noah's room. It was small and sparsely furnished, a twin bed, a cheap dresser, shelves made from cinder blocks and boards. But Noah had decorated it with drawings and pictures from magazines, creating a space that was undeniably his. This is my room, Noah announced proudly, and this is my collection of rocks, and this is the drawing I made of a dragon, and this is... He continued the tour with 5-year-old enthusiasm, while Victor listened with complete attention. Elena watched them together and felt something shift in her chest. This was real. Noah had a father. She was going to have to find a way to make peace with that. When the tour concluded, Victor pulled out his phone again. I almost forgot. Dr. Harrison said you need to take this antibiotic twice a day for the next week. He showed Noah a picture of the prescription bottle. It tastes pretty bad, but it's important. I know, Noah said solemnly. Mama already told me. Good, and you need lots of rest. That's boring, though. I know, but getting better isn't always fun. Victor glanced at Elena. Maybe we could arrange for some things to make rest less boring. Books? Puzzles? Noah's eyes lit up. There's this Lego set I saw at the store, but it was too expensive. Could I have that? Elena watched Victor struggle visibly between wanting to immediately buy Noah everything and understanding he needed to defer to her. We'll talk about it, Victor said finally, using her own phrase. Noah accepted this with resignation, already learning his father's tells. As the afternoon wore into evening, an awkward question emerged. Was Victor leaving or staying? The custody agreement said his first official visit was in 3 days, but they'd just brought Noah home from the hospital. Leaving felt wrong, but staying felt like crossing a boundary that hadn't been clearly defined yet. Victor solved the problem by checking his watch and standing. I should go. I have some business to handle, but I'll call tomorrow to check on you, okay, Noah? Noah nodded, then surprised everyone by moving forward and hugging Victor around the waist. Thanks for the stories. Victor's arms came around his son carefully, like he was holding something precious and breakable. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Anytime, Noah. Anytime. At the door, Victor paused and looked back at Elena. We're going to make this work. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded anyway. Yeah, we are. After he left, Elena helped Noah into pajamas and settled him into bed. He was asleep almost immediately, his body still recovering despite his protests that he felt fine. Elena sat in her living room alone, staring at her hands. 3 days ago, her life had been difficult but predictable. Now everything had changed. She had resources she'd never dreamed of. She had a co-parent instead of solitary responsibility. And she had Victor Russo back in her life in ways she still couldn't fully process. The future was uncertain, frightening. full of potential pitfalls. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't facing it alone. That had to count for something. The first counseling session happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Noah's discharge. Elena had arranged for a trusted neighbor to watch Noah, not wanting him present for what she suspected would be a difficult conversation. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, specialized in high-conflict co-parenting situations and came highly recommended by Margaret. Her office was deliberately neutral. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, a box of tissues positioned strategically on the side table. Elena arrived first, her palms sweating despite her best efforts to appear calm. Victor walked in exactly on time, dressed in a business suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. Dr. Chen greeted them both warmly and gestured for them to sit. "Thank you for coming. I understand this situation is complicated, so let's start with the basics. What does successful co-parenting look like to each of you?" Elena spoke first. "I want Noah to have a relationship with his father without losing the stability we've built. I want decisions made together instead of Victor steamrolling me with resources I can't match." Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "And you, Victor?" Dr. Chen prompted. "I want to be a real father, not just a name on legal documents. I want Elena to trust me enough to include me in Noah's life without constantly expecting me to fail or hurt him." "Those are reasonable goals," Dr. Chen said. "But there's significant history here that we need to address. Elena, you spent 5 years in hiding because you were afraid. Victor, you spent 5 years grieving a child you thought was dead. Both of you have legitimate pain. The question is whether you can move past it." The sessions became a weekly ritual, each one excavating layers of hurt and resentment. Elena talked about feeling trapped in their marriage, about Victor's controlling behavior, about the specific terror of being pregnant and powerless. Victor talked about the devastation of believing his child was dead, about the 5 years of grief that had hollowed him out, about the betrayal of discovering it had all been unnecessary. Dr. Chen didn't let either of them off easy. She pushed Elena to acknowledge that her fear, while real, had prevented her from exploring other options. She pushed Victor to recognize that his need for control had created the conditions that made Elena feel running was her only choice. "You both made decisions based on incomplete information and powerful emotions," Dr. Chen said during their 4th session. "The question isn't whether those decisions were perfect. They weren't. The question is whether you can forgive each other enough to move forward." Meanwhile, Victor's visits with Noah were gradually increasing. The first few were awkward, both of them trying too hard, but they found their rhythm through shared activities. Victor took Noah to aquariums and museums, read him endless stories, taught him chess with a patience Elena had never seen in him before. Noah, for his part, was cautiously opening up, asking questions about Victor's life, testing boundaries in the way children do when they're trying to understand where they stand. The breakthrough came 5 weeks after the hospital reunion. Victor arrived for his scheduled visit to find Noah crying inconsolably because a bully at school had pushed him down and broken his favorite toy. Elena was trying to comfort him, but Noah was beyond consolation. Victor knelt in front of Noah without hesitation. Hey, look at me. What happened?" Through hiccuping sobs, Noah explained about the bully, about feeling small and helpless, about not knowing how to make it stop. Elena expected Victor to suggest violence, to solve the problem with intimidation the way his world operated. Instead, he sat on the floor and pulled Noah into his lap. "I know it feels terrible right now," Victor said quietly. "I know it hurts to have someone be mean to you for no reason. But you know what? That bully is acting that way because he's unhappy. Hurt people hurt people." "That doesn't make it okay," Noah protested. "You're absolutely right, it doesn't. And tomorrow you and I are going to talk to your teacher together and make sure she knows what's happening. But I also want you to understand something important. Being strong doesn't mean being the biggest or the scariest. Being strong means being kind even when someone's been mean to you, means standing up for yourself without becoming a bully yourself." Noah sniffled. "How do I do that?" "We'll figure it out together. You, me, and your mom. That's what families do. We help each other through hard things." Elena watched this exchange with something cracking open in her chest. This wasn't the Victor she'd run from. This was someone new, someone who'd learned gentleness, who understood that power wasn't always about dominance. That night, After Noah had fallen asleep and Victor was preparing to leave, Elena stopped him at the door. "Thank you for how you handled that today." Victor shrugged, but she could see the conversation had affected him too. "I'm trying to be the father he deserves instead of the one my instincts want me to be. It's working. He's starting to trust you." "And you?" Victor's eyes searched hers. "Are you starting to trust me?" Elena considered lying, offering platitudes. But if they were going to make this work, honesty had to start somewhere. "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others." "Fair enough." Victor paused, then said, "I kept my promise. The business restructuring is complete. I'm out of everything questionable." Elena had been monitoring this through discreet inquiries, not quite believing it until she saw evidence. "I know," Margaret confirmed it. "You were checking up on me. Not accusatory, just observational." "Of course I was. Trust requires verification." Victor's laugh was unexpected and genuine. Reagan, quote, "I didn't know you were a Cold War history buff." "I'm not, but the principle applies." Elena hesitated, then made a decision. "Do you want to come to Noah's school concert next week? He's got a solo in one of the songs. He's been practicing constantly." The invitation clearly surprised Victor. "You want me there?" "Noah wants you there. And maybe I do too." Something shifted in Victor's expression, hope and vulnerability mixing in ways she'd never seen on his face before. "I'll be there. Thank you for asking." The concert was in the elementary school gymnasium, rows of folding chairs facing a makeshift stage. Elena spotted Victor immediately. He stood out among the casually dressed parents in his tailored suit, but he'd made an effort to blend, sitting in the back row instead of demanding front row seats. Noah saw him too, and his face lit up with a smile so bright it made Elena's chest ache. When his solo came, a simple melody about seasons changing, Noah sang directly to them, his voice sweet and slightly off-key, but filled with joy. Afterward, Noah ran to both of them, and for the first time, they stood together as his parents, not opposing forces, but a united front celebrating their son. Other parents noticed, whispering speculation, but Elena found she didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. Noah was happy. That was what mattered. The transformation wasn't linear. There were setbacks and arguments. There was the time Victor overstepped by enrolling Noah in an expensive private school without consulting Elena first, leading to a blistering fight that required Dr. Chen's intervention to resolve. There was the time Elena panicked and almost ran again when she saw unfamiliar men watching her apartment, only to discover they were Victor's security team, and he'd forgotten to tell her he'd expanded their coverage. But through each conflict, they learned to navigate together instead of alone, learned to communicate before acting, learned that mistakes weren't betrayals if they were addressed honestly. 6 months after the hospital reunion, Victor broached a subject Elena had been avoiding. They were in her apartment. He'd started spending time there regularly, claiming he wanted to be where Noah was comfortable. Noah was asleep in his room, and they were sharing coffee at her small kitchen table. "I need to ask you something," Victor said, his tone careful. "And I need you to answer honestly, even if you think I won't like it." Elena braced herself. "Okay. Do you think there's any chance for us? Not for Noah's sake. Not because it's practical, but because of who we are to each other." The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Elena had been determinedly not thinking about this, focusing solely on co-parenting and avoiding the complicated feelings that surfaced whenever Victor was near. "I don't know," she said finally. "There's history between us. Hurt that doesn't just disappear because time passes." "I know. But there's also this," Victor gestured between them. "Whatever this is, this awareness, this pull. I feel it every time I'm near you, and I think you feel it too." Elena couldn't deny it. The attraction had never died, had only been buried under layers of fear and resentment. "Feeling attracted to you doesn't mean we should act on it." "Why not? We're both adults. We're both single. We're already in each other's lives constantly." "Because if it goes badly, Noah suffers. Because I'm not sure I can trust you not to hurt me again. Because you're scared," Victor interrupted gently. "Which is fair. I'm terrified too. But we can't live our whole lives based on fear, Elena. At some point, we have to decide whether the possibility of happiness is worth the risk of pain." Elena wanted to argue, but the truth was she'd been thinking about this too, noticing the way Victor looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The accidental touches that lingered too long, the moments when their old chemistry sparked to life despite everything between them. "I need time," she said finally. "I can give you time, but I'm not going to pretend I don't want this. Want us. Want the family we could be instead of just the co-parents we are." The conversation stayed with Elena for days. She discussed it with Dr. Chen, who predictably refused to tell her what to do, but asked probing questions about what she actually wanted versus what she thought she should want. She discussed it with Margaret, who pointed out that the custody agreement didn't prohibit a romantic relationship, but suggested proceeding with caution. She didn't discuss it with Noah, but Noah, perceptive as always, brought it up himself one night during their bedtime routine. "Mama, do you love Victor?" Elena froze in the middle of tucking him in. "That's a complicated question, baby." "Tommy's mom says it's not complicated. She says you either love someone or you don't." "Tommy's mom is oversimplifying." Elena sat on the edge of Noah's bed. "Adults have complicated feelings. I care about Victor. I respect him. But love is... Is it because he's my dad? Because you can love him even though he's my dad. Tommy's parents love each other, and they're his parents." The child logic was irrefutable. Elena smiled despite herself. "When did you get so wise?" "I don't know, but I think you should give him a chance. He's trying really hard to be good." "I know he is. And you look happy when he's here. Happier than you looked before, when it was just us." The observation pierced straight through Elena's defenses. She hadn't realized Noah had noticed her loneliness during their years alone, had cataloged her unhappiness and filed it away. "I love you so much," Elena said, pulling him into a hug. "You know that, right?" "I know, and I love you too. And I think I love Victor now too. Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay. You're allowed to love whoever you want." "Then why aren't you?" The question kept Elena awake long after Noah fell asleep. Why wasn't she allowing herself to love Victor again? Because he'd hurt her before? Because his world was dangerous? Or because being vulnerable again terrified her more than any external threat? The decision crystallized 2 weeks later when Victor's past caught up with them anyway. Elena was walking Noah home from school when a car pulled up beside them, moving too slowly, windows tinted too dark. Every instinct she'd honed during 5 years of running screamed danger. She grabbed Noah's hand and started walking faster, but the car matched their pace. The back window rolled down and Elena's heart stopped. But instead of a weapon, a face appeared. A woman's face, hard and bitter. "You must be Elena," the woman said. "Victor's little pet project. Did he tell you about me? About Christina?" Elena's blood ran cold. Christina, Victor's girlfriend who'd died. The one Elena had used to justify her fear. "I don't know what you want. I want you to know the truth about your precious Victor." The woman's voice was venomous. "I want you to know that Christina didn't die in a random accident. She died because of Victor's enemies, and he covered it up to protect his reputation." "Mama, who is that?" Noah's voice was frightened. Elena pulled him closer, backing away from the car. "We're leaving. Don't follow us." "He'll destroy you too," the woman called after them. "Everyone who loves Victor Russo ends up destroyed. Remember that when..." Security appeared from nowhere. Victor's team materializing with the efficiency Elena had come to expect. They surrounded the car, forcing it to stop. One of them escorted Elena and Noah quickly away, while others dealt with the woman. By the time they reached Elena's apartment, she was shaking. She got Noah settled with a snack and cartoon, then called Victor with trembling hands. "There was a woman," she said without preamble. "She stopped us on the street, said Christina's death wasn't an accident, said it was your enemies and you covered it up." Victor's silence was damning. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "Where are you now?" "Home. Your security team handled it. But Victor, if she's right, if you lied about how Christina died, I'll be there in 10 minutes. We need to talk face to face." He arrived in 8 minutes, his expression grim. Noah was still occupied with his cartoon, so they stepped into Elena's bedroom for privacy. "Tell me the truth," Elena demanded. "All of it. No more protecting me from reality." Victor's shoulders sagged. Christina's death was an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. That part was true. But what I didn't tell you was that she was leaving a meeting with me when it happened. A meeting where I'd told her we were done because I was still in love with my wife who'd left me. Elena processed this. So her being near you contributed to her being in that place at that time. Yes. And I've carried that guilt for 5 years. Not because her death was my fault. The drunk driver killed her, not me. But because if we'd never gotten involved, she wouldn't have been there. Who was the woman today? Christina's sister. She blames me for her death. Has been harassing me periodically for years. My security team has standing orders to remove her from my vicinity. Elena sat on the bed, trying to sort through her feelings. You should have told me about this before. I know. I was trying to protect you from my past, but you're right. You deserve the full truth, not sanitized versions. Victor knelt in front of her, his eyes earnest. I can't promise that my past won't touch you and Noah sometimes. I've spent 15 years building an empire, and that comes with enemies and complications. What I can promise is honesty. No more hiding threats or difficulties. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd spent 6 months proving he could change, who'd restructured his entire life for their son, who was kneeling before her offering transparency instead of excuses. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared of getting hurt again. Scared of Noah getting hurt. Scared that loving you means signing up for a life where danger is always lurking. I know, but Elena, danger exists whether we're together or not. Christina's sister would have confronted you regardless. My enemies know Noah exists now. Being separated doesn't make you safer. It just makes you face threats alone instead of together. Together, Elena repeated softly. Is that what we are? That's what I want us to be, if you'll risk it. Victor took her hands in his. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought I should hate you for leaving. And I think, maybe, you still love me too. The truth was, she did. Despite everything, despite 5 years apart, despite the fear and anger and hurt. She loved this man who'd been broken by losing them and had used that breaking to become someone better. I do love you, Elena said, and watched hope bloom across Victor's face. But if we do this, we do it differently than before. Equal partnership, full transparency, no controlling behavior disguised as protection. Agreed. Anything else? Family therapy continues, and if you ever make me feel trapped again, I'm gone. Not running away this time, but choosing to leave. There's a difference. Understood. Victor's hands tightened on hers. Can I kiss you? Elena laughed despite the gravity of the moment. You're asking permission? New me, remember? Consent matters. She leaned forward and kissed him, and it felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown simultaneously. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. We're really doing this? If you're willing, no pressure. We can take it slow. Slow is probably wise. Noah needs time to adjust. We need time to rebuild trust. However long it takes. They told Noah that evening, keeping it simple and age-appropriate. Mama and Victor cared about each other and wanted to spend more time together as a family. Noah's response was characteristically direct. Does this mean Victor is moving in? Elena and Victor exchanged glances. Not right away, Elena said carefully. We're going to take things slow. But eventually, Noah pressed, because this apartment is pretty small for 3 people. Eventually is possible, Victor allowed, but there's no rush. Noah seemed satisfied with this answer, already moving on to more important topics like whether they could get a dog now that they were going to be a real family. The next year unfolded with the careful deliberation of people who'd learned that rushing led to disaster. Victor and Elena dated properly this time. Dinners and movies and conversations that went past midnight. They went to couples counseling in addition to co-parenting therapy, excavating old wounds and learning new patterns. Victor sold his penthouse and bought a house in a good school district with a yard big enough for the dog Noah campaigned for relentlessly. They moved in together gradually, Noah's belongings migrating first, then Elena's, until one day she realized she hadn't been back to her old apartment in weeks. The wedding happened on a Saturday morning in the backyard of their new house, small and private with only close friends and family. Noah served as ring bearer, taking his responsibility with utmost seriousness. Margaret stood as Elena's witness. Marcus stood as Victor's. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Noah piped up with, "I object to not having a dog yet," making everyone laugh. They got the dog that afternoon, a rescue mutt Noah named Dragon, despite his complete lack of resemblance to mythical reptiles. Dragon became Noah's constant companion, sleeping in his room and following him through the house with devoted loyalty. 2 years after the hospital reunion, Elena found herself watching Noah play in the backyard with Victor and Dragon, their laughter carrying through the open windows. She was pregnant again, this time planned, wanted, celebrated, this time with a partner instead of facing it alone. Victor caught her watching and smiled, that particular smile he saved just for her. He said something to Noah that made the boy giggle, then jogged over to where Elena stood on the porch. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands settling on her growing belly. "About how different everything is now, about how terrified I was 2 years ago, and how that fear almost cost us everything. But it didn't. We found our way back to each other. We built something new," Elena corrected. "Better than what we had before because it's built on honesty instead of fear." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "I spent 5 years believing I'd lost everything that mattered. Getting it back, getting you and Noah, was like being resurrected. I'm not wasting this second chance." "Good, because I'm not running again. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Victor agreed. "Always together." Noah called for them to come play, and they went, joining their son in the grass while Dragon bounded around them in enthusiastic circles. The afternoon sunshine filtered through the trees, painting everything in golden light, and Elena felt something she'd been too afraid to feel for years: genuine peace. The path here hadn't been easy, had required both of them to change in fundamental ways, to confront fears and flaws and failures. But standing in their backyard with Victor's arms around her and Noah's laughter filling the air, Elena knew it had been worth it. They'd started with collision and fear. But they'd built something beautiful from the wreckage, a family that was real and whole and chosen. Not perfect, not without complications or challenges, but theirs, built on truth and trust and the kind of love that survived being tested. Years later, when Noah was older and asked about how his parents got together, Elena would tell him the truth, that sometimes love required running away, and sometimes it required standing still. That being brave meant facing fear instead of being controlled by it. That family wasn't just about biology, but about choosing each other every day. And when Noah inevitably asked if she regretted the 5 years they'd spent apart, Elena would pause and consider. Those years had been hard, lonely, frightening, but they'd also shaped her into someone strong enough to stand beside Victor as an equal instead of being overshadowed by him. Had given him time to become someone capable of partnership instead of domination. "I regret the pain," she would say finally, "but I don't regret who we became because of it." Because in the end, that was the truth. They'd both been broken by their separation, but they'd used those broken pieces to build something stronger than what existed before. And that was worth everything. The evening settled soft around their house, lights glowing warm against the darkening sky. Inside, Noah was already asleep, Dragon curled at the foot of his bed. Elena and Victor sat together on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting on her belly where their daughter was growing. "Do you think she'll be as stubborn as Noah?" Victor asked. "She's your daughter. Of course she'll be stubborn." "Our daughter," Victor corrected gently. "Everything good in my life is ours now." Elena smiled and pressed closer. Somewhere in the distance, city lights glittered against the horizon, the world they'd both come from, still turning, still dangerous, still complicated. But here, in this moment, they were simply a family, safe, together, home. And that was everything.